Well, for more on what to expect at the SONA this evening, I'm joined now by Nedbank economist Isaac Matshego. He's with us here in studio. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Nampo.
So, Isaac, of course, the government has a lot to consider. Our big SOEs are not doing well at all. They're under a lot of financial stress. That puts the government under stress because of all the guarantees. The ratings agencies are watching us. What can we expect the president to tell us?
You know, this is the time to sort out the state-owned enterprises. Because if we are going to continue with this model of a developmental state, we've got to ensure that the institutions of development, which these SOEs are really the big part of, work efficiently, because that's what drives economic growth. The private sector contributes, but the state institutions also have got to contribute to growth in South Africa.
Now, efficiency is a key word here, but then with efficiency, with some of these institutions, we may have to see job losses. I mean, Eskom is a case in point where people say it's bloated with staff and there needs to be cuts there. But then now, if we want this developmental state, we have a situation where we're putting people out on the street, adding to a ridiculously high unemployment level already.
We've got to make them financially viable, and they've got to be operationally efficient, because what we're talking about here is sustainability. We cannot continue as a country to keep on bailing out these institutions, you know, year in, year out. For a couple of years now, in the budget, for instance, huge sums of money, billions, you know, are allocated to these enterprises. And what we have to do is stop that, because, I mean, that simply means that, you know, just bailing them out in future, we have to keep on raising taxes, a situation we've seen over the past 3 fiscal years. And that squeezes the economy even more. So making them viable financially and operationally so is very, very important.
So before we went on air, you told me that out of the top 6 SOEs, only about 1 of them actually are financially stable. Just take us through that. And how do we get the efficiencies? What does government need to do? Does it need PPPs to get that efficiency? In the case of Eskom, do they need to break it up into 3, or can they make it efficient without doing that?
Yeah, I mean, the review of the big SOEs was in the budget review last year. And it actually showed that out of the top 6, only the airports company is financially stable. Now, what is the airports company doing right that the others aren't doing? Remember, these are virtual monopolies in the economy. They've got very little competition in their areas of operation. So we have to focus on fixing the management, the operations, the finances, because these have to drive development in South Africa. I mean, that's very important. I cannot overstress the point.
But my question is, of course, we need to do all of these things, but there's that debt, that heavy debt. Eskom is on its own, 420 billion rand worth of debt. The others, I don't know how much they contribute. But then, of course, government also has guarantees for these organizations. What's going to happen if there's this restructuring? Where does that money go? Where does the debt go? And is that going to have an impact on our credit rating?
You know, what's got to happen is, let's use Eskom. What's got to happen is that Eskom has got to generate enough revenue every year in order to meet its operational needs and also service its debt. Because what's happening right now is that Eskom just needs more capital. It cannot even keep up with the debt repayments without raising more debt. I mean, we saw last week the announcement of a 15 billion syndicated loan. So the debt keeps going up. Government is just giving guarantees, and that is a contingent liability on government debt. And this poses a risk, of course, on, for instance, the ratings. I mean, another downgrade would just mean that the cost of borrowing just goes up. So if we're not really sorting out the real problems at these institutions, what we are doing is we just, you know, increasing their need to borrow more and even at a higher level, which is not a sustainable situation.
We're kicking the can down the road before an explosion, basically. What do you expect the president to say this evening, specifically around Eskom, because he's not going to be telling us about all the SOEs?
Well, I hope the president will continue on his theme of really sorting out the big SOEs. I hope that today he will set the tone for the big plans that are coming, to really sort them out. I mean, I really expect the big numbers to be in the budget in 2 weeks, but today the president has got to set the tone to say that these are the next measures. I mean, let's look at Eskom again. Already management has been replaced and controls are in place, and now we need to see, the next step. Is he going to bring in private sector partners? Because remember, development is a partnership between the state and the private sector. People who are saying that no privatization and all that, we're not really calling for, total privatization of Eskom. Bring in private sector partners who can bring in a particular set of skills in financial management, in whatever, running the new power stations, making them more efficient and all that. So I expect the president to say, this is the next step of measures that we are going to be taking to really sort out these institutions.
Sometimes you need a crisis to turn things around. Do you think that we're at that crisis point, that you're confident that we're going to see a better midterm picture?
We're not at that level yet, but we are reaching crisis levels that I hope we're not going to get into, because, a crisis for me says, something is going to go horribly wrong. And we cannot afford, for instance, to have Eskom failing to provide enough electricity, even if it's going to be for a short time. No, we need it all the time, because the manufacturing sector, the mining sector, agriculture sector, and all the sectors in the economy actually need constant supply of power. So we don't need a crisis in the sense that we're going to see maybe half of the operations of Eskom failing. No, we cannot afford that.
We need investment, so electricity needs to be there. Thank you very much, Isaac, for your time. That was Isaac Matshego. He's an economist at Nedbank.